Hey there, listeners. Welcome to the show. Kath Langman here with you as per usual. And so this week's episode is a little bit of a follow-on from last week. If you haven't listened to that one, maybe you want to go give it a go. But last week I made you a little bit of a promise. I said that I would bring you some real numbers, pricing related, profit related from two real brands, including one that had pulled back from wholesale entirely, absolutely convinced that there was more profit in selling online. You know, they'd really bought into that whole just sell direct kind of mentality. And I told you that when we actually ran the numbers, it turned out to be not as simple as that. So today I want to keep that promise and I'm going to use it to answer a bigger question, which is really the question underneath the last few episodes on this show. How do you price a premium brand so that it's genuinely, durably, sustainably profitable over the long term? And you know what we're trying to do as brand owners is to be profitable enough not just to survive, but to actually fund your own growth. Now, a bit of a warning for the very creative, non-number related people in my listener base. This is a numbers episode, but I promise you it's not going to be like a spreadsheet read aloud. There will be some figures though, and they genuinely reward following. So if you can grab a pen or a note on your phone, this is a good one to do that for. Now, here's the heart of it. Before you go anywhere near a calculator, most brand owners are pricing off the wrong number. They look at how good a product is or how good a whole channel is by its gross margin, gross profit margin, that, you know, lovely, healthy looking percentage that you mark up from your cost of production to your retail price. But I think gross margin is potentially one of the most misleading numbers in your entire business because it only ever counts one single cost, what the product cost you to make. And it ignores every other cost that stands between making a sale and actually keeping some money. And those costs can be enormous. I mean, you all know that, right? And, excuse me, and they can be wildly different depending on how and where you sold the thing. So the channel that you're selling through. Channel can be online, obviously, can be wholesale into other people's stockists. It can be brick and mortar in your own retail store. It could be via other platforms, whether it's Amazon or eBay or to export distributors. There's so many different places that you are able to sell your thing, right? The number that actually tells you the truth has a rather less exciting name, and it's contribution margin or contribution per unit. So not what's my margin, but when I sell one of these through this particular channel, what do I actually get to keep in my back pocket after I've paid for everything that that sale really cost me? And that's where the number, that's the, you know, it's the number that really matters. It's the number that you should be pricing against. And the moment that you switch from looking just at that gross profit margin to looking at your contribution margin per unit, some very uncomfortable, but also very useful things start to, you know, fall straight out. So let me give you the picture in one image because it's the whole idea. Judging a product or a channel by its gross margin is a little bit like choosing two job offers purely on the salary and then completely ignoring them, ignoring the fact that one of them is a 5-minute walk from your front door and the other is a 90-minute commute each way, which costs you time and money. So on paper, the salaries might be the same money, or one might be better money. But what you might actually have left of the end of your day and your life, you know, at the end of it, after you spend 90 minutes getting there each way, so an hour, 3 hours total, that's very, very different. So your gross margin is the salary, but your contribution per unit is what's really left after that commute. And a lot of brands are choosing their products or their channels or their whole pricing strategy on the salary, and then they're wondering why there's nothing left in the bank. So I'm going to make it real for you today with an actual product, a couple of products actually, but the first one is coming from a fashion brand that I audited recently, and I'm going to keep them anonymous because really, all you need to know is that they're a lovely brand with a genuine loyal following. They sell through several channels. They have a website, they have a couple of their own shops, and they also sell wholesale. Now, one of their best-selling items is a pair of shorts, and it sells for about $55. It costs them about $26 or $7 to make, finished and ready to sell. And so the gross profit is around $29 a pair. Call it a 52% margin. And if you stopped right there, which is where a lot of people would stop with their pricing strategy, you would say, great, that's a nice product. It's a great markup. There's, $29 a pair margin there. Grand. Now, the first problem is hiding inside an average. So this is in this particular brand, but this is very common for probably most brands. So I want to pull it out into the light for you because it does catch a lot of people off guard. Across the whole range, this brand's blended gross margin came out at a fairly nice sounding 55%, which sounds fine, doesn't it? Maybe even healthy. But when I broke it apart, category by category, the picture flipped straight over. The best-selling lines, which were the shorts and the shirts, and maybe one or two other things, the things that were really selling through quickly, flying off the racks, selling like hotcakes, as I like to say sometimes, they were sitting at, well, under 50% gross margin. They were more like 45. And the much higher margin products that lifted the whole range's average up, they were at 60 to 70% gross margin. They were the ones that were selling in very small numbers in comparison. So that, appearing to be comfortable 55% average margin was actually being propped up by the slow sellers, while the products going, doing the actual sell-through work were, and bringing in most of the revenue, were the very thinnest margin of the entire range. So the average really wasn't very helpful, and it was also actively hiding a problem. And you can't price well off an average that is lying to you, right? Here's where it can get even more interesting. And this is the contribution per unit doing its work. Take that same $55, $56 pair of shorts and that $29 of gross profit, and let's just follow it through two different ways of selling it and watch what actually survives the journey. First, sell it over the counter in one of their own shops. That $29 isn't really $29 to keep because, of course, that shop has to exist. The rent alone worked out per order, that goes through, per dollar that goes through the till, or per order that goes through the till rather, comes out to about $9. So your $29 becomes more like 20. And that's before you've paid the person standing behind the counter, before the power bill, before any other single fixed or variable overhead or expense. So, it's definitely not $20 contribution margin in store. Now, sell it, the same pair through the online store. You might have to ship it free, which is increasingly, of course, what customers expect. Not what they always get, but, a lot of brands have a free shipping threshold. But then watch what happens to that margin next. Off comes the postage. In that particular business's case, it was about an average of $12.50. Off comes the picking and packing, the satchel, the tissue paper, that little thank you card. So there goes another couple of dollars per parcel. Off comes your transaction fees and the merchant fees. obviously those fees also apply in the brick and mortar store. And all up, the real cost of getting that one online order out the door is about $19. So your $29 of gross profit is now about $10 on the very same pair of shorts that you might have achieved $20 over the counter. Probably not, though, when all of those other overheads came out. But anyway, same product, same price. This particular brand had been under the impression that they were making, extraordinarily higher profits in store than online, but they hadn't been looking at, all of those costs to serve the customer and deliver the order. But then, depending on whether, where the business is at in its growth trajectory, they may or may not have a customer base to sell to online. Most brands that sell online have to do some advertising to bring people to the online store, also to bring people into their brick and mortar store. So, let me, if you run the numbers here, and let me share some numbers from this particular audit, because this will make you sit up. What if that online order or that in-store order isn't from an existing customer, and you need to bring new customers into the online store, and you paid for, say, some meta ads to bring people to this online store? For this particular brand, the cost of winning a single purchase through advertising was running at around $70. So let's do this whole sum on that pair of shorts sold online or in store, shipped maybe free to a brand new customer. $29 gross minus about $19 to fulfill it, and then minus about $70 to acquire that customer. That's not a profit any longer. That is a loss of around $60. That, you paid $60 for the privilege of selling somebody a pair of online shorts. Now, to be perfectly fair to this brand and all other fashion brands and similar sorts of businesses that are selling via any channel, a real order is usually, a bit bigger than a single pair of shorts, and the dollar value, of course, would not be $55 for the total order in that particular case. So, in the real situation, it was not that brutal. But even on a normal sized order of around, $100, $110, once you've paid to acquire a genuinely new customer, that first sale barely washes its face. It roughly breaks even at the very least. And that leads me to the single most important sentence in this whole episode. So let me say it slowly. For a brand like this, you don't make your money on a new customer's first order. You make it on the second one, the repeat one, the order that comes through with no acquisition cost attached, ideally at full price. That's where your actual profit lives. Now, let me add one more factor into this mix, because of course we do talk a lot about how do you enable your brand, or how do you get your marketing to work for you in a way that you can sell to new customers without having to constantly discount. Because if you had cost of advertising and then you took a discount off the retail price, it's costing you even more for that new customer, right? So this is precisely why training your customers to only ever buy on discount or letting them drift away after that first single purchase is so lethal to your business. You are killing the one order that was ever going to make you any money in the first place. And that is, can you get them back for a second order at full price to actually make a profit from this new customer that you've just spent so much money to acquire? Now, let's just pause here for a second and, pull the lens back a little bit, because you might have just uncovered something that changes how you should think about pricing. And it's definitely something that I want you to remember from this episode. For years, the accepted wisdom was that a 50 to 60% gross margin between your cost of goods and your retail price, your recommended retail price, meant that you had a healthy margin and you could grow a healthy product-based business. And that was the benchmark. If you could hit that kind of 60% gross margin, you were doing pretty well. And the simple fact is these days that is no longer true. A 50 to 60% gross margin is extremely difficult to thrive in growing a business. And in a lot of cases, it's barely enough to survive. And you've just watched or listened to why that is from the numbers that I've shared in the breakdown. Every one of those variable costs, the costs of making the product, the cost of shipping it, and above all, the cost of advertising to win the customer in the first place, every single one of those costs has gone up and up and up. So the old 60% benchmark was set in a world where it cost a fraction of what it does now to acquire that customer. I think that world is probably gone for good. So that historically good 60% gross margin, once you run it through everything that we just ran that pair of shorts through, is now frankly a pretty difficult, miserable place to be. Does it mean you can never make it work? Of course not. I'm talking in the averages here, but it does generally leave you with not very much to actually live on, let alone reinvest in growing your business. And if you are trying to grow your business, you do need to be able to do that. You need to be able to reinvest in new products, in manufacturing larger volumes upfront. And of course, continuing to invest in your marketing and advertising, because that is what drives the growth. So what do I actually aim for in terms of margin when I'm helping a brand price for the sake of profitability and being able to grow? I want to see gross margins in the 70 to 85% range, genuinely. 70 at the floor, 85 and up if the brand's premium positioning can carry it. And for a truly premium brand, it very often can and should carry it. That is the margin that survives contact with the real world, the real business world that we all operate in. That's the margin that pays for your advertising, it absorbs your cost to serve, it funds your next stock run, and it still leaves you with something behind. So that fashion brand at 55% average gross margin, propped up, by the slow sellers with the best sellers down at 45%, that's not a healthy business hiding a small problem. That's a business running on fumes and calling it a margin. But to name an enormous but non-negotiable catch, so please don't hear the first half without the second, you do not get to just charge those prices. Pricing at 70 to 85% margin really only works if two things are absolutely genuinely spot on. The first is your product. It has to actually be worth it. The quality, the materials, the craft, the experience of owning or using or consuming it, all of it has to genuinely justify the price you're asking and, provide the value to the customer to justify the price you're asking. Because a premium price on a mediocre product or a product that provides a mediocre experience is a promise you break the moment the customer opens the box. And the second is your marketing content. Everything that you say and show, the way that you communicate the value, the story, the reason this product costs what it costs, has to be on point as well. Which, of course, if you've been listening to some of these recent episodes, is the entire thing that we have been talking about. Really understanding your buyer well enough to tell him or her exactly what he or she needs to know, understand, and believe. And if either of those two things, the product or the content, is not up to scratch, then a premium price won't lift you. It will expose you, and the customer will fill the gap between what you charged and what you delivered, and they will abandon ship and they won't come back. So high margins aren't a license to overcharge. They are what a genuinely excellent product, communicated brilliantly, is allowed to command. And I think required to command, of course, now, just to make the maths work out in your business. The price, the product, and the content all have to rise together. You can't have one without the other two. It's like a three-legged stool. If you take one off, the whole thing topples over. Which brings me rather neatly to the second brand example that I am going to share in this episode. This one you'll probably know if you've been listening to this show for a while, because it's one of ours that we operate, Babiators, the children's sunglasses brand. And Babiators is a real live example of what happens when the pricing, the positioning, and the market all move at once, and a brand doesn't, what happens if a brand doesn't move with them. So we didn't start Babiators. We took this on after they'd been operating in Australia and New Zealand for about 10 years. And several things were happening all at the same time. And between them, they were really strangling the profitability. And these, this happens when a business has been operating for some time. It's not like I'm pointing the finger at anyone here. But the first thing that happened was that the prices just had not been adjusted in years. And in that same stretch of time, the cost of actually making and landing the product had climbed steadily. And that was due to a mix of the weaker exchange rate as well as higher shipping costs to get the product in the country. And both of those things were completely outside of the brand's control. And both of them quietly ate into the margin from underneath without anyone ever really deciding to let it happen. So on one side, the costs are rising and the prices are standing still. But actually, there was something else happening at the same time. And this is the part that can turn a margin problem into a brand problem. So while Babiators, had been holding still with their prices, the market around them in this product category had filled up. So initially, Babiators had always been the premium, had the premium positioning in the product category. But at this point, a whole crowd of new competitors had entered the space. And because Babiators' price point hadn't moved in years, it suddenly found itself no longer standing where it used to stand in the premium positioning, and it had lost its clear position. Its price had drifted through, sheer standing still while everyone else arrived. And so literally the brand with its price and its positioning had kind of drifted into the forgettable middle ground, not the cheap option, not the clearly premium option, just somewhere in the muddled middle where nobody really stands out and nobody quite knows what, who you are or what to make of you, which is a pretty dangerous place for a premium brand to end up because it's a bit of a double blow. On the one hand, the margins are being squeezed from the rising costs and in this particular brand's case, the creeping discounts and more frequent discounts. And on the other, the premium positioning itself is drifting away. And as it drifts, it really ends up alienating the audience that was drawn to the brand in the first place because they were drawn to the premium brand. So the people who loved Babiators for what it stood for, it stood for something really specific, they looked up and found a brand that had kind of blurred into the crowd. So you end up losing money and losing your identity or your brand's identity at the same time. And each of those things just makes the other worse. And then on top of all of that, there was this one channel decision that I was kind of talking about last week, where, somewhere along the line, the brand had actually really steered away from wholesale. It had pulled back from selling through retailers, not entirely, but mostly, on the belief that there was simply more profit in selling online, direct to the customers. The whole notion of full price, cut out the middleman. And that was, the exact belief that we spent some time pulling apart last week on the show. But, with Babiators, we ran it. We, ran the numbers properly, contribution per unit, both channels, everything the online sale truly costs, the ads, the discounting, the fulfillment, all of it against everything that the wholesale sales truly cost. And what we actually found in this brand's situation, and this is important, was that online was not more profitable than wholesale. Sometimes it was, but mostly not. Wholesale was not more profitable than online either, though. So run honestly, the contribution per unit, the two channels came out roughly equal most of the time. The whole premise the brand had been reorganizing itself around in the few years before we took it over, that online was clearly more profitable place to be simply wasn't true. But the really important insight, I think, is the next one. And I definitely invite you to remember this because it does tie directly back to last week. Those two channels are not just equally profitable in isolation. They are at their absolute best when they are grown together at the same time because they can feed each other. The wholesale channel would never have performed the way it does now without the brand building and the demand building that the online marketing is doing. And, think about it. It's the online presence, the content, the ads. It's, all of these activities make the whole brand visible. And that makes a parent walk into a shop already knowing and wanting Babiators. The online work creates the demand that the wholesale stockist then gets to capitalize on and fulfill. They're not rivals. Online is the engine that makes wholesale fly. But that only works if the online channel isn't competing too aggressively against the wholesale one. The moment the online channel leans too hard into discounting, really big discounts, undercutting the retailers and just being super aggressive with online strategies, it stops feeding the wholesale channel and starts strangling it. Not to mention, of course, it also strangles the profit on the online sales. So the mistake was never simply they pulled back from wholesale. The mistake was believing that online was more profitable when it was merely equal, and then chasing that phantom, running the whole online channel in a way that would have undermined the wholesale one anyway, but also just discounting themselves into almost oblivion. So fix the pricing so the margins are real again, re-establish the premium position so the brand stops drifting into the forgettable middle, rein in the reflexive discounting is literally the only lever being pulled to drive revenue. So that online stops bleeding, but it also stops competing with the brick and mortar shelves, and then grow both channels concurrently, each one making the other stronger. And that's the whole play in this brand's case. That's what equally profitable actually unlocks. It's not a choice between two channels, but a partnership between them. Now, I can almost hear some cogs whirring in my listeners' brains and a question forming. If they're equal and they're better together, do I even need to think about the difference between them at all? And I think that you do, because there's one that really matters. It's not, and it's not about which is more profitable, but it's about who owns the relationship with the end customer. Both channels do bring you repeat business. They should do. On the wholesale side, obviously, the repeat business is the stockist reordering, and they sell through what they bought. They come back to you for some more, which is great. It should be dependable, real repeat revenue. But in wholesale, the brand actually has a relationship with the shop, not with the customer who ends up wearing the product. The end customer relationship belongs quite reasonably to that retailer. Whereas online, it's completely different. And this is worth a lot more than I think a lot of brands realize. When you sell direct, you own the customer relationship. You own that relationship with the end user of your product. And part of the value of that is pretty obvious. I think you've got their details, you can email them, you can look after them, you can bring them back yourself at full price again and again. But the value is actually, there's, a much deeper, more subtle value, and it can compound over time, because when you are in direct contact with the people who actually use your product, it means you are learning from them constantly, and you find out what they love and what they don't love. You hear why they bought or why they nearly didn't buy. You learn the exact words and language that they use to describe what you make. You see what confuses them, what delights them, what might be missing, what the opportunities are, and all of that intelligence flows straight back into making your products better and your marketing sharper year after year. So that's the thing that a wholesale only brand genuinely would struggle to do, because it sits at arm's length from the end customer behind the retailer, and it never really gets to meet the person using the thing. It can make a lovely product and send it off to the world, but the feedback loop is not there, so the brand ends up flying half blind. So owning the customer relationship online isn't just a repeat sales machine, it's how a brand gets better on purpose over time. And it's why, if you've been with me the last few weeks, the brands that genuinely understand their buyer are almost always the ones talking to that buyer directly. You can't learn what he or she needs to hear if you never actually meet them. I think wholesale has a catch on top of that, which is worth mentioning quickly. The stockist owns the volume, the terms, and the timing. They decide how much to order and when. They pay you often on their schedule, and they can choose to drop you. So wholesale is really efficient and it reaches people you never could alone, but it isn't yours to control and it doesn't teach you much. The real distinction between the two channels isn't really profit, it's ownership, control, and above all, learning. And I think when you see it that way, you grasp the idea that it isn't, the point's not to choose, it's that each one gives you something that the other can't. So, ideally you want both, you want to grow them both together on purpose. And you can absolutely add your own brick and mortar stores as another channel or export. I mean, this is not literally just a two-channel highway here. Like, you apply the same thinking and analysis and thought process to any channel that you're selling through. So the pricing and the channel strategy aren't two separate conversations, is my point here. They're the same conversation because what a price earns you depends entirely on where you sell it. And because the channel that teaches you the most is the very channel that lets you keep improving the product and the content that justify a premium price in the first place. There's actually one last thing that both of these brands scream at you, and it's about discounting. Because now at last you can see why it's so corrosive in cold, hard arithmetic rather than just brand feeling. When your real contribution per unit is really thin, like $10, once everything else is honestly counted, or negative if there's expensive advertising taking it all from you, a discount doesn't shave a little slice off a nice fat margin, it eats a thin one alive. Take 20% off that $56 pair of whatever, shorts, pants, whatever. That's about $11 off the price, and your contribution online was only about 10. So one single small 20% discount doesn't dent your profit, it basically erases it. And it takes you straight past zero and out the other side. And now you are quite literally paying people to take your product. That is the arithmetic sitting under everything that I've been banging on about on this show for quite some time. Obviously, in the case of Babiators, they had drifted into the middle ground, the discounted middle ground, the fashion brand's unrecovered costs. It's the very same wound, a contribution that was always far thinner than the margin made it look, being nibbled away to nothing. And it's why real margins, the proper 70+% margins, aren't greedy. They're the buffer that lets you weather all of this and still have a business at the end of it. Now, where I'm going to almost leave you with this episode, you've almost certainly at some point been told to chase a channel with the best margin, or maybe been quietly reassured that a healthy looking gross margin means that you should have a healthy growing business. But margin was never the number that mattered. Contribution per unit is what you actually keep from one sale through one channel after everything that sale genuinely cost you. Price against that number. Aim for real margins that can survive what things actually cost today versus, the comfortable old benchmarks from a cheaper era. Make sure that your product and your marketing are absolutely good enough to earn those margins, and then design your channel mix so that the parts feed each other instead of fight with each other. That is how you grow, or how you price a premium brand for profitable growth. And now I want to leave you with the reason all of this actually matters, at least to me, because pricing for profit can sound a little bit cold, a little bit mercenary, and it honestly couldn't be further from how I think about it. Healthy margins are not about greed. They are about freedom. When a brand is genuinely profitable, properly profitable, when it's priced so that there is real money left after everything that sale truly costs, it gets to do so much more than just survive. It gets to innovate, to fund the R&D, to develop the new thing, to invest in the materials and the quality that most brands can't justify. It gets to look after people properly, and it gets to reach beyond itself and actually make a difference to the community it serves. None of that is possible on fumes. None of that is possible, with a brand scraping along on a thin, nibbled away margin and that has nothing left to give. Every dollar, in that scenario is already spoken for it just keeping its doors open. Thin margins don't just put the business at risk, they quietly strangle everything that should have made or would have made the brand worth loving in the first place until there's absolutely nothing left but a commodity competing on price, indistinguishable from the crowd. In terms of Babiators, because they're priced now as a proper premium brand and they're not caught in a race to the bottom, they get to do work that goes beyond selling sunglasses, like their genuine mission to educate parents about sun safety for children's eyes, which is something a lot of parents don't realize until, somebody tells them or they experience a problem in person. And that kind of work costs time and money, and that comes directly out of being profitable enough to fund it. A brand trapped in the discounted middle ground, fighting for every last dollar of margin, could never afford to do it and wouldn't really be trusted to either, because that kind of genuine mission is exactly the sort of thing that makes a brand premium. So it's like this loop. It's a self-fulfilling cycle or a continuous loop. The profitability funds the meaningful work, and the meaningful work deepens the premium positioning, and the premium positioning is what earns you the margins that fund it all. So it does feed itself. So when I talk about pricing your premium brand for profitable growth, this is what I actually mean. Not just squeezing every last cent out of your customer, but building a brand strong enough and profitable enough to create, to improve, to stand for something, and to give something back year after year. That is what the right margins buy you, and it is the difference between a brand that merely gets by and a brand that thrives. That's what I have for you in this episode. A bit of a different one, but I know pricing can be a topic that many people feel a little bit anxious about whether they're getting it right or not. So I hope that you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, and you know somebody who could also do with listening to it, I would be forever grateful if you could share this with them, this episode. And otherwise, I look forward to, as always, being with you again this same time next week. Bye for now.